Join with me in our prayer of preparation. May the words of my mouth
and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen. Today we finish up our series on a license to fail. We saw in the first week how our failure is not the end of the story. Next we saw in Paul's story how God was working through his blindness. Our failures give us opportunity to allow God to be at work in our lives. Today we look at denial and explore how rejection can lead to faith. So let's start by looking at one of the places where there is so much rejection, yet rejection seems to make a person better at their craft. I'm referring to the work of comedians, of course. Who could better teach us about rejection than people that are willing to stand up in front of crowds and tell jokes that no one thinks are funny? Well, there is one place that is particularly grueling to work as a comedian, and that's at The Onion. If you haven't heard of it before, it's a weekly newspaper that only publishes satire. They make jokes about mundane, ordinary life or politics, and sometimes other legitimate newspapers have run their stories in their own papers thinking that they were true, which only makes the whole thing even funnier. One real news site once ran a story they found on The Onion about Neil Armstrong, where he admitted that he never really landed on the moon. They shared this fake quote from Armstrong. The entire thing was filmed on a soundstage, most likely in New Mexico. Well, if you've gone into the office of The Onion, you'll find perhaps the least funny thing you'll ever see. That's comedians rejecting and dissecting each other's jokes. Each writer is required to bring in a list of 15 potential headlines for fake stories on Monday. They will sit around the room, tell their headlines one by one, and discuss the details of why it's funny or how you could make it funny. Sometimes a headline on Monday can get a big laugh like this one: Cardinal teaches Pope to make church by interlocking his fingers. But just because it's funny on Monday is no guarantee that it makes it in the paper. In fact, that's the most bizarre part of their work. They are there to write satire. They write a headline that gets huge laughs, and then they reject it. The supposed explanation is that a good joke headline doesn't necessarily have enough meat to it. They write whole fake news stories, and there has to be something more to the story than just a good headline. The biggest fight of the day at The Onion, though, was over an issue of the newspaper's identity. What is the DNA of The Onion? The headline was this: Ghost just dropped by to say boo. One group in the room loved it. Another group absolutely hated it. A usually mild-mannered editor even walked out in protest during the debate. One group said their paper is broad and wide. That's exactly the kind of thing that they would accept in The Onion just because. The other thought it was very childish and had no place in The Onion. They rejected it outright. Identity and rejection seem to go hand in hand. I've experienced enough rejection in my own life to know that it can completely change how you see yourself. It would be tough for me to be in a room like that with people so exact and intense with their critiques, and I know this congregation is nothing like that. You're laughing. Why would you laugh? Yet rejection seems to be a very necessary part of life. Rejection defines who we are with and who we are against. There's a whole series of words and phrases we could talk about that relate to the rejection. One is defense mechanism, which is a way of stopping truth from entering our minds. Another is denial, which we usually think of in terms of someone not accepting something. If you got denied, somebody refused to give you something you wanted. But I want to focus in on one particular kind of rejection, and that's rejection by disowning. Have you ever loved someone and they told you they don't love you back? Have you ever had a friend who betrayed you and stopped speaking to you? Have you ever had a child tell you that they hate you? This is disowning. This is an individual rejecting you so that they can be something else, so they can be who they choose to be without you. Disowning is as old as humanity, but no less painful to experience. In the Gospel of Luke, we read how Peter rejected Jesus. He disowned Christ so he could save his own skin. But there's actually a whole lot more to the story here. So let's go back to the beginning. Peter is a pretty typical guy when we first meet him in Luke. He has a home, he's married with children, and he has his own successful business. He's living the dream. But then Jesus shows up, and it seems to turn everything upside down. Jesus asked Peter if he would follow him, if he would become a disciple. This was a huge honor for a blue-collar worker like Peter, and Peter jumps at the chance. He and his brother follow Jesus, leaving everything behind. They see Jesus perform miracles. Skin diseases disappear. Spiritually tormented people are suddenly sane, and the dead are raised to life. In the midst of these amazing things, Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do people say I am?" And they repeat what they've heard. John the Baptist, Elijah. Then he asks, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter jumps in, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus tells Peter, in essence, that he's right, and Peter is going to help others know this truth too. Peter will be the rock. He's the foundation for others to know the living God. What a high point that must have been for Peter. He gets one answer right, and Jesus tells him he'll be in charge of a church that guides eternity.